It's March the 11th, 2021, and welcome to the Water Action Platform. My name is Piers Clark. I'm the chairman of the ISLE Group. Today marks our 25th webinar. It seems incredible that just over a year ago, on March the 23rd, 2020, we launched the Water Action Platform. Of course, back then, most of us had no idea how the pandemic was going to develop. And I say most of us because today we're going to talk to some microbiology specialists who, I suspect, knew only too well just how this pandemic was going to play out. Now, when it started back in March 2020, this was meant to be just a small WhatsApp group, a place where a few water utilities could share their COVID-19 experiences. It quickly grew. Some could say it went viral. And today we have over 1,300 members from across 92 countries. The Water Action Platform has been and will always be open to all and free at the point of use. We have some wonderful sponsors, as listed here, without whom we would not have been able to do this. Over the past year, we've expanded to cover much more than just COVID-19. We now have themes to each webinar. Today's theme is Innovation in Microbiology. And with the help of ANDI, specialists in carbon-free conferencing, we've moved last year to this, more engaging than Zoom, platform for these webinars. But that's not all. And forgive me if I sound proud, but it's because I am. Alongside the webinars and the dedicated website and the dozen or so specialist Water Action Platform WhatsApp groups, last August, following the terrible accident at Beirut Port, we launched the COVID Response Register, Crisis Response Register. We've also organised digital tours and side-stream workshops. We even had a Christmas Advent calendar. Now, for those of you who've been with us on this journey over the past year, thank you for your support. And I hope that you found it useful. We're going to continue for another year. However, we always start with a few news stories from the world of water and COVID-19. And this week we start with this story about wastewater-based epidemiology and its implementation in urban and rural communities. In September last year, researchers at the University of Saskatchewan got together with Saskatoon Wastewater Treatment Plant Manager, a chap called Mike Sadowski, and worked out a plan on how to predict COVID-19 case numbers in the City of Saskatoon. Now, it's worth noting that they were already running a WBE monitoring program for illegal drugs, so they just modified it for the SARS-CoV-2 RNA. In November, Mike and the researchers were able to warn the health authorities that a spike in cases was coming. On the 21st of November, they predicted 100 to 150 new cases every day for the next week. And they were right. Frustratingly, at that point, the program ran out of funding. It had got that far through money cobbled together from other projects at the university and in-kind contributions from the City of Saskatoon. Thankfully, in February, the Public Health Agency of Canada awarded $137,000 to conduct 27 weeks of wastewater-based epidemiology testing and to extend it to 5 First Nation communities. Kerry McFadden, one of the lead researchers, is quoted as saying that in these smaller communities, this new program will help isolate outbreaks before they flare up and get out of control. The goal is to have simpler testing that can be done locally. For example, if the local tribal council could have the equipment and be trained to have the skills to test their own wastewater. This is yet another example of wastewater-based epidemiology in practice. We have truly come so far in the last year. Our second story relates to this critical review of what we've learned. Think back. A year ago, we were wiping down our groceries and worrying about doorbells and handrails. It's perhaps hard to imagine now, but at the start of this pandemic, scientists didn't know whether surfaces, droplets, or aerosols were the most important route of transmission. Inevitably, here's a paper that looks at what we learned about SARS-CoV-2 in water and wastewater. Now, as I tell this story, keep in mind that no case of transmission via contact with sewage or contaminated water has been reported. To our knowledge, there are only 2 studies addressing the infectivity of SARS-CoV-2 from raw or treated sewage. They come from Romaldi et al. And Westhouse et al., and we reported on both of them here in October and December of last year. Romaldi assessed the presence and infectivity of SARS-CoV-2 in raw sewage and treated sewage from 3 wastewater treatment plants in Milan, Italy. The results were negative for infectivity, although SARS-CoV-2 RNA was detected. We recommended cautious optimism, i.e., don't go swimming in sewage. There are, of course, other reasons, quite aside from COVID-19, why you shouldn't go swimming in sewage. In the later study by Westhouse, they looked at 24-hour flow-dependent samples from 9 cities in Germany. Composite samples were collected, concentrated about 100 times by centrifugal ultrafiltration, and then assayed. Although the authors detected viral RNA in all samples, the results for infectivity were null. The authors concluded that sewage does not appear to be an important route for transmission. Good news so far. On the other hand, plenty of studies have shown that SARS-CoV-2 can remain infectious for up to 6 days in water, and that other species of coronavirus may remain viable for more than 1 year, depending on the sample conditions. Now, this isn't new news. Back in 2005, Wang et al. Assessed samples of raw sewage from the 309th Hospital of the Chinese People's Liberation Army. They also looked at SARS-CoV species. Interestingly, in that study, even after negative results for infectivity, the authors suggested that sewage was still a possible transmission route. Why? Well, because more resistant and infectious variants may yet appear. So what does this tell us? The good news is sewage and wastewater is not an important route for transmission. However, we can't get complacent. We have to remain vigilant. Now, with that news, we go over to South Africa to hear from Joe Burgess and about the latest vaccines and their variants. Joe, are you there?
Hi Piers, yes I'm here and glad to be back. I'm bringing news about variants of SARS-CoV-2 emerging around the world and updates on the vaccine progress. Now first the bad news. B117 has mutated again. In fact, it has a new mutation called E484K, which is the exact mutation that the South Africa and Brazil variants contain that causes them to be so much more problematic. In regard to the USA in particular, this B117 UK strain has been found in 42 states, and you can see in this map how it's spreading around the US. In addition to that, there are 4th and 5th variants of concern, both arising in the United States. One is Cal20C, which was first discovered in Southern California, and it's now spread to 26 other states and other countries, including Australia and the UK. And there's a 5th variant of concern that's arisen in New York, which, as you can see on the map, is a bit of a hot spot for variants because of the amount of travel that goes through the New York airports, and it's not a surprise that the variant has been detected here. Now, the good news. Another study has found that our immune response elicited by vaccination lasts for 8 months, and the only reason it stops at 8 months is because the study was 8 months old at the time of writing. It's also been discovered that at least one vaccine works against every single one of the variants detected so far. We're watching history unfold. We're watching evolution in action. Researchers from 9 collaborating institutions across the US and Europe have detected variants, some of concern and some not, in the RNA of SARS-CoV-2 in sewage samples that they sampled across the US and Europe in the last month. What was interesting was that they found exactly the same variant arising independently in New Mexico and in Louisiana. And what this tells us is that global surveillance of genomic changes in SARS-CoV-2 is really essential so that we can spot these new variants early and we can act accordingly, both in terms of treatment of patients who catch them and vaccine design to prevent them from spreading in the future. The second big take-home message is that we're watching natural selection in action. Convergent evolution, where you see the same traits arising in different places independently of each other, is a hallmark of positive selection, of selection pressure. When it comes to selection pressure, well, what is that? The virus's primary goal is not to kill us. Its goal is to survive. So if it's having a hard time surviving, either through expanding herd immunity or antiviral therapies or greater vaccination among the human population, then that's pressure to evolve. And that's why we're seeing variants of concern appearing much more often than we have done until now. Obviously, it's not great, so what can we do about it? We can vaccinate, and here's an update on our vaccine table. The peach colour represents new information since my last update, and there are two really important notes. The first is that we naturally want to compare efficacy rates of symptomatic infection across the different vaccines, but try not to do this because these are different trial designs, so they're not directly comparable. Instead, I urge you to look at the bottom 3 rows of this table for severe COVID-19, disease, hospitalisation and death. This is the important stuff. In addition, on the Pfizer and Moderna studies against the emerging variants of concern, we don't have real-world studies. These are Petri dish tests. So it's likely that the vaccine's efficacy is reduced a little, but not a lot. Also, the Pfizer and Moderna studies were different types of Petri dish studies, so the antibody numbers are not directly comparable between the two. Now, the big news, particularly for me, because this is the trial I'm participating in, this is the Johnson & Johnson single dose, the Ensemble study. They've reported their data to the Federal Drugs Agency in the United States. There's a huge document available from J&J and another huge document from the FDA, and the sources are on the slides that you'll receive afterwards. The key points are that the efficacy 28 days after vaccination from around 40,000 participants, so me, and 39,999 others, are between 57 and 72% reduction in moderate disease, 86% reduction in severe disease, and that was across the board in all the different countries where the different variants predominate, and there were no hospitalizations and no deaths in the vaccine group. This is fantastic news. So the efficacy is slightly higher in the US, 72% compared to South Africa, 64%, but protection against severe disease is similar in all settings. The side effects of the injection are a headache and fatigue for a day, which is what I had. There have been no reports of anaphylactic shock at all. In a bonus analysis, the J&J trial is following a subgroup to measure asymptomatic infection. And I'm in this subgroup, so that means I'm having more blood tests than some other people. But it's important because it tells us if the vaccine lets you catch COVID-19 but not have any symptoms, but you can still give it to other people, or it stops you catching COVID-19 at all. What they've reported is a small reduction in asymptomatic infection in the vaccine group up to 29 days, about 23%, but this rose to nearly 75% after day 29. And what that means is the J&J vaccine stops you catching COVID-19 at all. And on that happy note, Piers, it's back to you.
Thank you, Jo. Look, I know you happen to live in the magnificent rural countryside in South Africa, and I was on tenterhooks, waiting for a giraffe to appear behind you. Maybe next time. We now come to our technology showcases, and we have 2 of them for you this week. First, we have Qbiotix, a spin-out from Qbiotix, which itself was only formed in 2019. Qbiotix was formed to develop novel proprietary technologies for the detection of nucleic acids, such as viruses like SARS-CoV-2. Qbiotix operates in the field of autonomous wastewater monitoring. Here is Vito Levi d'Ancona sharing more.
Good afternoon, my name is Vito Levi d'Ancona. I present Qbiotix's approach to reduce disease spread to prevent pandemics through autonomous continuous wastewater monitoring. COVID-19 taught us that we can use wastewater-based epidemiology to shed knowledge on how community infections spread. It also taught us that current testing standards, PCR or antibodies, do not give results in time, do not tell us who to test and where, are expensive. New technologies are needed to enable early warning and protect society. Current wastewater testing practices take too long and are too expensive. With intermittent testing, pathogen presence in wastewater is reported too late to prevent pandemic spread. I present today the case for autonomous continuous wastewater monitoring, as autonomous and continuous reporting allows early action to prevent a pandemic spread. At Qbiotix, We are developing technologies to power autonomous and continuous wastewater monitoring, to passively gather information on local presence of both asymptomatic and symptomatic persons, to help identify who to test and where, to rapidly upgrade the system to new variants and strains so that healthcare systems can afford testing entire populations repeatedly. Our first technology patented is a non-enzymatic molecular assay designed for automation and for rapid upgrade to new targets. Unlike PCR, can be automated and designed to work in a contained environment, can be quickly adapted to new bacteria, antibiotic-resistant bacteria, virus strain and variants, can be optimized for autonomous operations, and does not suffer PCR supply chain issues. Our second technology is a patented filter concentrator unit, capable of concentrating fluids for recovery of microorganisms and chemicals. It maintains transmembrane pressure and vast liquid flow over time, compared to current filter systems that lose efficiency over time due to caking and fouling. We integrate these technologies into Qboxes to routinely monitor viruses in local wastewaters. These are self-contained units housed in standard 8-feet containers that can be sent by air, sea, and road and installed in hours, are cost-effective, and remove the need to collect transport samples to a local remote laboratory and eliminate delays in waiting for lab results and possible data loss. Qboxes are delivered fully configured, are telemetry controlled, and have internal climate control. Our Qbox is installed on a service basis under a long-term contract with company-supported service visits every few months. Join us in our journey to know more about our molecular assays, to know more our filter concentrator units, but join us to develop the world's first autonomous pandemic monitoring systems. Thank you, Vito.
Thank you, Vito. Qbiotix has been established to integrate those two technologies mentioned there into the Qboxes. Qboxes currently don't exist, but Vito is looking for partners. So if you're interested in getting involved or just want to know more, let me know. Our second showcase is from Tecta-PDS. The company's been around for 15 years and developed the world's first and only all-in-one self-contained rapid automated microbial test for E. coli, coliforms, and Enterococcus bacteria. Here is Doug Wilton, President and CEO of Tecta-PDS, sharing what they do and how they do it.
The water industry is doing incredible things to improve control, boost efficiencies using all these incredible advanced technologies, automations, etc. It's all being accelerated by COVID. Where does traditional microbiology fit into this advanced world? Frankly, it doesn't. But the Tecta solution does fit today's world. It is the world's only rapid, automated, and EPA-approved microbiological monitoring solution. It is a fully automated lab in a box. It has incredible ease of use, referred to by our customers as set and forget. Approved, quantitative, networkable, with rapid results in as fast as 2 hours. What opportunities exist in your utility if you had a rapid on-site, easy-to-use microsystem? And frankly, it can test the entire water system. You can test drinking water, wastewater, raw water, you can even test sludge. Let's consider 3 customer use cases. There's operating within a lab, and that's bringing the benefits of automation to a lab operation, improving the capacity, improving efficiency, reducing your costs. 2 folks that we love working with, PUB Singapore and the Kuwait Ministry of Health. In both cases, they wanted to automate their drinking water testing, reduce time for their emergency samples, reduce the time for results, and reduce their manpower requirements. Operation case number 2 is linked to a lab, and 2 folks I'd like to talk about, Las Vegas Valley and WaterCare New Zealand. They went about it in slightly different ways. One is actually doing all their Tecta testing in the water plant itself, linked back to the lab. Other did a slightly different. They created a small satellite lab, and that lab is located in downtown Las Vegas, 100 kilometers away from their typical lab. They get faster results, they have more flexibility, and they reduce the burden on their overall lab operation. The last version I'd like to talk to, the last use case, is replacing the lab entirely. It includes remote locations with limited lab infrastructure. It includes mobile labs on wheels. So the 3 folks we really love working with is Indigenous communities here in Canada. We have over 50 communities that we're working with that are no longer forced to wait 2 weeks for their results. They can do it on site, get the results themselves. The International Triathlon Union is using us for all their water testing, ranging from the 2018 Commonwealth Games to the 2021 Olympics for all the water events that are taking place there. And the third folks I'd like to talk about is Sydney Water. Sydney Water has taken the idea of a mobile lab and they have just blown it up to an incredible size. They plan to have an entire fleet of mobile labs for their environmental response samples, improving their turnaround time for public health, giving them more flexibility. Automating microbiology, bringing those automation benefits. We're extending a lab's capabilities to multiple locations. We're providing a lab equivalent solution for remote locations, providing a new higher level of water and human health protection. Thank you very much for letting me talk about Tecta-PDS.
Thank you, Doug. Tecta-PDS told me that they are now supplying hundreds of municipal water operators and government agencies across 40 countries globally. Now, what this shows us is that microbiology is no longer an after-the-fact check-the-box parameter. Throughout COVID-19, water utilities globally have been using technology like this. Any tool that can help simplify a process, help save time, help save valuable resources is now of particular interest. Now, this provides us with a rather marvellous segue to our sector expert, Professor Tobias Barnard from the University of Johannesburg. With a PhD in biochemistry and as a director of the Water and Health Research Institute, who better is there to talk to us about recent innovations in water-related microbiology testing? If the technology allows, we will now go live to Professor Barnard in South Africa. Are you there, Professor?
Hi, Piers. How are you doing?
Good. Great to connect with you. Thank you for taking the time to meet with us today.
It's a pleasure.
Now, I understand that you know Joe Burgess, our resident microbiology expert, very well. And just before we get into your sort of mini lecture, can you tell me, you and she together worked on forming the South African young water professionals, is that right?
That's correct. As you mentioned, I was a biochemist that came into the water sector. I had to meet new friends. And I met Joe, and we each started with 250 Rand to create a bank account to start the South African Young Water Professionals. And we are proud to say that it's grown now. We've handed it over, and now I think internationally Young Water Professionals have a membership of 10,000 people.
It is amazing. And the bit I love about that story is the fact that you both just put your hand in your own pocket and got the thing up and running. It's very, very admirable. Well done. Well, thank you for your time. I'm going to let you take over the slides and do your mini lecture. So over to you.
Thanks. Good morning, everybody. And I have to thank Piers and his team for inviting me to do this talk. I was asked to speak about innovation in microbiology for water treatment. And I thought a good title for my talk could be Learning from Our Microbes. Now, before I start, I need to make a quick disclaimer for the microbiologists listening. This talk is meant to give a quick overview of some aspects of how we use microorganisms and could not cover everything in 4 minutes, but call me and we can discuss more options in a virtual coffee. The current COVID-19 pandemic has shown the human race that Mother Nature still has a few tricks up her sleeves, especially when it comes to microbiology. This was especially true when we consider how quickly the virus started adapting to its new environment that caught everybody except the microbiologists off guard. The reason is that microbiologists were expecting this because we are taught that microorganisms are designed to adapt and survive. And it's this adaptability that we will take through the talk today. Now, if you've been working in the water or wastewater treatment facilities or sector, you already saw microorganisms in action, for example, in biological treatments, and would agree that this is something we need to investigate more. If you do literature searches, you find a lot of information on how bacteria have been used to remove heavy metals, oils, and other contaminants from water and wastewater. And I wanted to show some of the review articles of how it has been used or studied for use in industry. One thing you will notice from all of this is a lot of the work is focused on using microorganisms to remove things from water, not really focusing on the killing of the microorganism. An interesting example of this type of work is the use of predatory bacteria to selectively kill bacteria in a water sample. In the example shown on the slide, the researchers showed how predatory bacteria could be used to remove gram-negative bacteria from water, followed by a secondary disinfectant step such as solar disinfection to remove the rest of the bacteria. This could be an interesting option for treating water in the future, especially when disinfection steps are not always 100% effective, or if we want to look at reducing the use of chemicals. Up to now, you would have noticed that we were working with whole bacterial cells, which means we need to keep them alive and happy, and that creates the need for continuous nutrient supply and waste removal, and for controlling things like heat generation, changes in pH, etc. One way that researchers started working around this is trying to isolate the protein or enzymes produced by the bacteria that would, for instance, break down lipids, and mobilizing it on some sort of support. This way, we could potentially continuously produce this product, even by cloning the gene and overexpressing the enzyme in a bacteria like E. coli. Even the supports used could be regenerated or made from a medium that could easily be recycled. An exciting example of harvesting and using a compound produced by bacteria are bioinfectants produced by these bacteria and fixing them to a support to stabilize this glycolipid and offer a way to add this to water for treatment. The bioinfectants in the example shown interferes with bacterial biofilm formation and thus reduces biofilm formation, something that could be added to membranes to reduce biofouling on the membranes itself. With the last slide, I wanted to show a research niche area focusing on the study and potential use of extremophiles, microorganisms that have adapted to grow in extremes of temperature, pH, pressure, and even radiation. If you listen to the talk by Frank Regala from Aqualia on the same platform on 18 February 2021, they most likely used an extremophile for the microbial desalination cell, something that was exciting to hear. Now, microbiology gives us the opportunity to simply ask what our requirements for removal or treatment in water are, and the likelihood is that there are microorganisms that have already adapted to deal with this. We simply need to go look for them or help them adapt to this new environment. Remember, this is what microorganisms do well. Simply think of how bacteria have adapted to surviving antibiotics we use.
Professor Barnard, thank you for that. That was such a quick gallop over such a broad topic. Let's jump into a couple of questions. So the burning one here is how long will it be before we can have online real-time sensors for microbiological contamination in the sewage treatment works, in the water network, or even at the point of use?
This is actually closer than what most people think. I'm aware of one product from Austria and one from the Netherlands, where they're already testing online sensors to monitor E. coli spikes in water. So work is already ongoing and being tested.
Good. And what about these emerging variants? What have we got to do to be able to monitor for those?
The problem with emerging variants is we have to wait for them to emerge. So we simply keep on following. We know what to look for now. So now we see if there is any changes and what we need to do to combat these changes.
How long might it take? Again, is that an impossible question to answer? If a new variant appears, have we got 5 years to work out how to monitor them, or could it be done? Could it be fast-tracked?
I think once you know what you're looking for, it could be fast-tracked. It could go faster and faster. I mean, if you look at the COVID, how quickly they're picking up new variants, studying the isolates that's being isolated so far. So it goes faster and faster with every round.
Excellent. All right, one last question. I said at your introduction that you're obviously good friends with Joe Burgess and you work together for the Young Water Professionals, setting that up in South Africa. I understand there was a spin-off that created it in East Africa. Can you tell me a bit about that?
So during our first conference we held, we wanted to help young water professionals in the rest of Africa, and we assisted the East African young water professionals to start their own chapter. And one of their projects was to plant 1 million trees as a way of giving back to society and not always just taking from it. So that was a very nice initiative, I think.
It's such a good story. And thank you for your time. What I love about that is it's about microbiologists seeding things and it growing more and more the more you reach out, which is so microbiological. Professor, thank you for your time. I wish you a very good rest of your day.
Thank you very much.
So, we now come to our final story of the day, and it's all about scented candles and how they have become the unfortunate victims of this global pandemic. It's hard to believe, I know, but negative reviews of Amazon's 3 best-selling scented candles have increased as COVID-19 cases have risen. What's driving this correlation? Well, Twitter user Kate Petrova. She's a social psychiatry and neurology student, and she did the mathematical analysis. Now, downloading a random subsample of customer reviews, she found that between January 2017 and January 2020, the average rating stayed at around 4.3 out of 5. However, between January and November 2020, when COVID-19 cases were on the rise, there was a sharp drop in scented candle ratings, but not, as you can see from this graph, for the unscented ones. Kate then decided to dig into the content of these reviews. She wrote a quick function that flagged up all the reviews that mentioned lack of scent and discovered that since the beginning of 2020, the proportion of reviews that complained about lack of scent grew from just under 2% to almost 6%. So, if you're trying to decide whether you've got a normal cough or COVID-19, buy a Yankee candle. But don't be too quick to blame the manufacturer if it doesn't smell of anything. You may lose your sense of smell, but please don't lose your sense of humour. Now, before I finish, I have 2 very quick comments. Firstly, at the end of the interview I did last time with Frank Regala, I jokingly asked about the UK's ability post-Brexit to get involved in the well-funded pan-European research programmes. For those of you who want to know more, there is a detailed interview which I subsequently did with Richard Buxbaum from Scottish Enterprises. Now, whether you're from the UK, mainland Europe, or from completely outside the European Union, in that interview, Richard shares some great insights, in particular on how you could tap into these programs. The links to the interview and to some of the key documents are included here. Secondly, some of you may recall the virtual tour that we organised with Aegea in Brazil last December. During that tour, we explored their amazing digital twin, and I'm delighted to say that on June the 9th, we will be holding another digital twin tour, but this time hosted by Idrica. More details to follow next month. So with that, we come to the end of this week's webinar. I once again thank our sponsors for their ongoing support and all our speakers and contributors this week. I also thank you for your time. The next webinar will be on Thursday, the 15th of April at the usual times. Megan will circulate calendar invites shortly. As a mark of respect and recognition to our members who celebrate Ramadan, which will start next month, our theme next time will be on water efficiency. I look forward to seeing you then. Keep asking questions, keep sharing, and keep safe.